Welcome to UBI Unplugged, breaking down the future of income.
Glad to be here. Excited to dive into this. I think it's such a crucial conversation, especially now.
I remain unconvinced, but always willing to listen, I guess. Show me the magic, folks.
Well, that's what we're here for, right? To unpack it. And I think the framing for today, UBI and international cooperation, that's really interesting. It takes it beyond just the individual, which is where a lot of the debate usually stays.
Exactly. It's about the bigger picture. I mean, we see these global challenges, climate change, pandemics. They don't respect borders. And if we're serious about tackling them, we need a system that promotes collaboration, not competition, and reduces desperation, not exacerbates it.
Right. The grand vision. But how does giving everyone money magically solve climate change? I mean, are people going to suddenly stop flying private jets because they get $1,000 a month?
It's not magic. It's about creating a foundation. People struggling to put food on the table aren't thinking about carbon footprints. But if you give them a basic level of security, they can start engaging with these issues. They can invest in sustainable solutions. They can support policies that address climate change. And yeah, it's not going to stop private jets, but it can shift priorities for a lot of people.
I think the key here is thinking about UBI not as a standalone solution, but as a component of a broader strategy. Paired with regulations, incentives for green technology, and international agreements, it could be a really powerful tool.
Okay, so more stuff piled on top of this idea, like layers of blankets hiding problems. But what about the practical stuff? Who's going to pay for it all? And how do you stop countries from just freeloading off of the system?
Financing is always the big question, right? But there are options: progressive taxation, closing tax loopholes, even redirecting military spending. There's a lot of money sloshing around. And as for freeloading, that's where international agreements come in. Think of it like the Paris Agreement, but for economic security. Countries commit to contributing a certain percentage of their GDP to a global UBI fund. We already have models for international cooperation and financial transfers. It's not a completely new concept.
Yeah, and you could tie contributions to things like a country's carbon emissions or their level of income inequality. So there's an incentive to address those issues as well. But the enforcement, that's the tricky part, right? How do you hold countries accountable?
Enforcement is always the tricky part. Ask the folks trying to deal with Russia. You can agree on paper all day long, but if there's no teeth, what's the point? So, who's the world police for UBI?
It wouldn't be a world police. It would be about diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions, maybe even tying access to international markets to compliance. The same tools we use now for other international agreements.
Right, and the EU provides a pretty good example in general. Countries are part of something bigger, and there are benefits to being part of it. So you are compelled, to some extent, to follow the rules. There are, of course, huge flaws with the EU, but it shows how regional cooperation can work.
The EU, yeah. Ask the Brits how well that worked out. Constant bickering, bureaucracy, seems like a nightmare.
Brexit was a specific situation driven by a lot of complex factors, and it showed the strains of supranational cooperation, sure. But it doesn't negate the successes of the EU in other areas like promoting trade and peace. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't try to build even better models of international cooperation.
And even Brexit, I think, showed the interconnectedness of economies. Leaving the EU has been economically challenging for the UK. It's a clear example of the downsides of going it alone.
Okay, but let's talk about something concrete here. You mentioned pandemics. How would UBI have helped with COVID, for example? Did giving people stimulus checks really stop the virus?
Stimulus checks were a temporary measure and they helped, but they weren't UBI. UBI would be a consistent safety net. People wouldn't have been forced to choose between going to work sick and losing their job. They could have afforded to self-isolate, and it would have reduced the economic desperation that fueled a lot of the social unrest we saw.
And think about the global implications. A pandemic anywhere is a threat everywhere. If people in developing countries had a basic income, they'd be less likely to migrate in search of work, potentially spreading the virus further. They'd have more resources to invest in local healthcare. It's about building resilience at the local level to prevent global crises.
Okay, I grant you that might have helped a bit on the margins. But the big problems with COVID were about vaccine distribution, not people's bank accounts. Rich countries hoarding all the doses. That's what really messed things up.
And UBI could have helped with that too. If developing countries had stronger economies, they would have had more leverage to negotiate for vaccines. They wouldn't have been so reliant on handouts from richer nations.
It's also about trust. When people feel economically secure, they're more likely to trust their governments and follow public health guidelines. Desperate people are more likely to be susceptible to misinformation and conspiracy theories.
Okay, I'll give you that too, but still, the cost. Where's all this money coming from? You say tax the rich, but how many rich people are there really? And how much are they willing to give up?
There's more wealth concentrated at the top than ever before. And it's not just about taxing income, it's about taxing wealth itself. Property, stocks, inheritance. We need to rethink our entire tax system. And honestly, a UBI could simplify a lot of the existing welfare programs, which would save money in the long run.
Yeah, streamlining the existing welfare system is a huge potential benefit. All the bureaucracy, the means, testing, it's incredibly inefficient and dehumanizing. UBI could be a much more streamlined and dignified approach.
Ah, the old simplify the system argument. Haven't heard that before, but governments never simplify anything. They just add more layers. So you end up with UBI on top of everything else, costing even more money.
That's a valid concern, and it highlights the importance of careful policy design. You have to phase out the old programs as you implement UBI. It's not about adding another layer, it's about replacing the existing system with a better one.
And that's where the policy criticism comes in. You have to be really intentional about how you design the UBI program. What's the level of the basic income? How is it indexed to inflation? How does it interact with existing Social Security programs? These are all crucial questions.
And what about inflation? If you just dump a ton of money into the economy, won't prices just go up? So everyone's still in the same boat, just with more expensive water?
That's a legitimate concern, but there are ways to mitigate it. You can phase in UBI gradually. You can implement price controls on essential goods and services, and you can invest in increasing the supply of goods and services to meet the increased demand.
And the level of the UBI is crucial. If it's too high, it could fuel inflation. If it's too low, it won't make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Finding the right balance is key, and it probably varies from country to country, depending on the cost of living.
So basically, you're saying it's really, really complicated, which is exactly what I thought from the beginning.
It is complicated, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. Building a better future is always complicated, but the potential benefits are enormous. Reducing poverty, promoting economic security, fostering international cooperation, these are goals we're striving for.
And I think it's worth exploring different models of UBI. Maybe a universal basic services model, where everyone has access to free healthcare, education, and housing. Or a hybrid model that combines a basic income with targeted support for specific needs.
Free housing? Now you're just making stuff up. Where are you going to get all these houses? Are governments going to start building them? Good luck with that. Think of the waste, fraud, and abuse.
There are innovative solutions, community land trusts, cooperative housing. It's about rethinking our approach to housing, not just building more of the same. And yes, there will be challenges, but we can learn from past mistakes and build more accountable and transparent systems.
And it's about investing in preventative measures, addressing the root causes of homelessness rather than just reacting to the symptoms. UBI can be a tool for prevention by providing people with the stability they need to stay housed.
Okay, I'm starting to see the potential, maybe, but it still feels like a pipe dream. Too many moving parts, too many opportunities for things to go wrong.
Every major social change faces resistance, but we can't let fear of failure stop us from trying to build a better world. UBI is an idea worth exploring, worth debating, worth fighting for.
And I think the conversation is shifting. More and more people are realizing that the old ways of doing things aren't working. Inequality is rising, automation is threatening jobs, and the social safety net is fraying. We need new solutions, and UBI is one of the most promising.
Well, I'm still not sold, but I'm at least less skeptical than I was at the start. You've given me some things to think about anyway. Thanks.
That's all we can ask for, right? To keep the conversation going, to keep challenging our assumptions, and to keep striving for a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely. And I think the international dimension of UBI is crucial. It's not just about individual countries, it's about building a global system of economic security that benefits everyone.
Okay, but before we all start singing Kumbaya, let's remember that the world is a pretty competitive place. Countries are always trying to get ahead of each other. How do you reconcile that with the idea of global cooperation on UBI?
By showing them that cooperation is in their own self-interest. A more stable and equitable world is a more prosperous world for everyone. And by creating incentives for cooperation, like linking contributions to economic benefits.
And by highlighting the shared threats we face. Climate change, pandemics, economic instability, these are problems that no single country can solve alone. We need to work together, and UBI can be a tool for building that cooperation.
So, you're saying it's about enlightened self-interest? That's surprisingly reasonable.
Exactly. It's not about altruism. It's about recognizing that our fates are intertwined. We're all in this together, and we need to act like it.
And I think that's a message that resonates with a lot of people. They're tired of the divisiveness, the polarization, the constant conflict. They want to see a world where people are working together to solve problems.
I guess I can get behind that. A world with fewer problems sounds good to me, even if I'm not entirely sure UBI is the answer.
It's not the only answer, but it's a part of the solution, and it's a conversation we need to keep having.
Absolutely. And hopefully we've given our listeners some food for thought today, some things to chew on, some questions to ask, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of hope for the future.
Yeah, maybe. Don't get your hopes up too high, though. The world still seems kind of broken, if you ask me.
But it's worth fixing, right? Even if it's a long and difficult process.
Definitely worth fixing. And that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on UBI Unplugged.
See, yeah, maybe.
Thanks for having me, and keep the conversation going.
Okay, so switching gears a bit, I was reading some news this week and it kind of ties into what we've been discussing. Oddly enough, there was an article about these voters, the ones who were really frustrated and felt betrayed, and some even voted for Trump hoping for economic change.
Oh yeah, I saw something similar. It's really alarming, that level of disconnect. It just reinforces my belief that addressing economic inequality directly, like with UBI, would tackle the immediate problems and build a stronger, more equitable society in the long run.
Wait, are you saying those Trump voters would suddenly become UBI advocates? I find that hard to believe.
Well, maybe not overnight, but I think it speaks to a broader yearning for economic security and a sense that the system isn't working for them. And if they see UBI as a potential solution, who knows? Politics is weird these days.
Exactly. It's about addressing the root causes of their frustration. They felt left behind, ignored. UBI could be a way to show them that their voices are being heard and that their economic well-being matters.
Okay, I see your point. But it also feels a bit opportunistic. Like you're trying to co-opt their anger to promote UBI. Is that fair?
It's not about co-opting anything. It's about recognizing a shared problem, economic insecurity, and offering a potential solution. I believe UBI can benefit everyone, regardless of their political beliefs.
I think it's about meeting people where they are, understanding their concerns, and showing them how UBI could address those concerns. It's not about converting them, it's about building bridges.
All right, fair enough. But speaking of broken systems, I also saw an article about how dysfunctional Congress is impacting economic policy. Seems like nothing gets done, regardless of who's in charge.
That's exactly what I was thinking. If Congress is so gridlocked, how can we rely on them to fix the economy? Maybe UBI is a way to bypass the political dysfunction and get money directly into people's hands.
It's an interesting point, but you'd still need Congress to approve the UBI program in the first place, right? So you can't completely escape the political reality.
Yeah, good luck getting that through Congress. They can't even agree on what day it is.
True, but the political landscape is always shifting. And if there's enough public support for UBI, Congress might be forced to act. It's about building a movement from the ground up.
And there are different strategies. You could try to pass a federal UBI law, or you could focus on state-level initiatives, experimenting with different models and building momentum.
State level, huh? So like California gives everyone $1,000 a month and then everyone moves to California? Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
That's where federal coordination comes in. You'd need to adjust the UBI level to account for the cost of living in different states, and you'd need to ensure that people can't double dip.
Yeah, and you need to think about the impact on state budgets. A state-level UBI could put a strain on resources, especially in smaller states.
But it could also attract businesses and talent, boosting the state's economy in the long run. It's about investing in the future.
All right. I'm seeing a possible vision here of a path forward, but I still don't know if it will work.
That's heartbreaking. It highlights the systemic inequalities that continue to plague our society. UBI could be a more direct and efficient way to address those underlying issues rather than relying on ad hoc economic interventions.
So you're saying UBI is a better solution than whatever Trump was promising. I'm not sure that's a high bar to clear.
Well, I think it's about providing a consistent safety net that addresses the root causes of economic insecurity, rather than relying on short-term fixes or empty promises.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to take control of their own lives rather than being dependent on the whims of politicians or the fluctuations of the economy.
Okay, but how would UBI specifically address the challenges faced by the Black community in Philadelphia? What about things like housing discrimination and lack of access to education?
UBI wouldn't solve those problems overnight, but it would provide a foundation for addressing them. It would give people the resources they need to move to better neighborhoods, invest in their education, and start their own businesses.
And it could be paired with targeted programs to address those specific challenges. For example, affordable housing initiatives, scholarships for Black students, and grants for Black-owned businesses.
So, more layers on top of the UBI? Seems like we're back to square one.
It's about a comprehensive approach. UBI is the foundation, and targeted programs are the building blocks that address specific needs.
Yeah, UBI can help provide a baseline of economic security, making targeted programs more effective.
I don't know. Sounds like a lot of wishful thinking. But let's move on to something else. I saw a report about how Trump's support is eroding among voters who initially backed him on economic grounds. What's that about?
That's significant. It shows that his economic policies aren't delivering the results they promised, and it underscores the need for a more nuanced and sustainable approach to economic stabilization, like UBI.
Right, the disconnect between promises and reality. And the fact that these voters are now shifting their support suggests they're open to alternative solutions.
But what are their specific economic concerns? Are they worried about jobs? Healthcare? Inflation? We need to understand that before we can say UBI is the answer.
It's probably a combination of factors. Job losses due to automation, rising healthcare costs, and stagnant wages. UBI could address all of those concerns by providing a basic level of economic security.
And it could give people the freedom to pursue education and training, to start their own businesses, and to take risks that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford.
Okay, but what about inflation? We've talked about this before. A lot of people are worried about prices going up.
That's a valid concern and it needs to be addressed. But UBI can also help to stabilize the economy by providing a consistent source of demand.
And by increasing people's purchasing power, it can help to stimulate economic growth.
All right. I'm not saying I'm convinced, but I'm listening. Now, I also saw an article about tariff rollbacks and how they're supposedly easing inflation. Is that true?
Even with a temporary rollback, Trump's economic policies are likely not as effective as advertised, and it underscores the need for a more nuanced and sustainable approach to economic stabilization, rather than reliance on disruptive trade policies.
Yeah, the tariff rollbacks are a temporary fix, and they don't address the underlying issues that are driving inflation.
So, what are those underlying issues, and how would UBI address them?
Supply chain disruptions, increased demand due to pent-up savings, and corporate price gouging. UBI could help to address the demand side of the equation by providing a consistent source of income for consumers.
And it could help to stabilize the economy by providing a buffer against economic shocks, like supply chain disruptions.
Okay, but what about the supply side? How would UBI help to increase the supply of goods and services?
By empowering people to start their own businesses and to invest in education and training, UBI can help to increase the supply of skilled workers and entrepreneurs.
And by providing a safety net, it can encourage people to take risks and to pursue innovative ideas.
All right. I'm starting to see the potential, but I'm still not convinced it's a silver bullet.
It's not a silver bullet, but it's a powerful tool that can help us to build a more just and equitable society.
And it's a conversation we need to keep having.
Speaking of scary situations, I also saw an article about the potential for widespread fear and instability induced by aggressive immigration enforcement practices. That's pretty heavy stuff.
Absolutely. It highlights the critical link between economic security, civil liberties, and social equity, and it underscores the potentially transformative role of UBI in such contexts.
Right. Because fear and instability can be incredibly damaging to local economies, impacting small businesses and broader economic development.
So how does UBI address that specific issue? Does giving someone a basic income suddenly make them immune to deportation?
No, it doesn't, but it provides a safety net for vulnerable populations, including immigrants. It can help them to stay afloat during difficult times, and it can give them a platform for long-term economic advancement.
It's about mitigating the fear and instability caused by these raids. When people feel economically secure, they're less likely to be targets of exploitation and abuse.
Okay, but what about the legal issues? If someone is undocumented, aren't they technically breaking the law?
That's a separate issue. UBI is about providing a basic level of economic security for everyone, regardless of their immigration status. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity of every human being.
And it's about recognizing the economic contributions of immigrants, documented or not. They're often essential workers who fill jobs that others don't want to do.
So you're saying we should give money to people who are breaking the law. I can see why some people might have a problem with that.
We're saying that everyone deserves a basic level of economic security, and that providing that security is not only the right thing to do, but it's also in our own self-interest.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that many undocumented immigrants are fleeing violence and persecution in their home countries. They're not criminals, they're refugees.
All right, I hear you. But it's still a tough sell.
It is, but it's a conversation we need to keep having, and it needs to be a conversation that's grounded in compassion and empathy.
Absolutely. And it needs to be a conversation that's informed by facts and evidence.
Speaking of facts, there was an article about the arrest of over 100 people on Tennessee roads in connection with Trump's deportation plan. Is that even legal?
It raises serious concerns about the erosion of fundamental civil liberties and the potential for systematic targeting of marginalized communities. This further supports the urgent need to implement a comprehensive UBI approach as a long-term solution to economic disparities and provide a safety net for vulnerable populations.
Exactly, because the fear created by those actions can have a chilling effect on the entire community. If people are afraid to go to work or to take their kids to school, that has a ripple effect on the economy.
So you're saying UBI would make people less afraid of the government? Is that really the case?
It's not about making people less afraid of the government. It's about providing them with a basic level of economic security so that they don't have to rely on the government for everything.
And it's about creating a society where everyone feels valued and respected, regardless of their immigration status.
Okay, but what about the cost? Are we just going to keep printing money forever?
We've already talked about the different ways to finance UBI, and it's important to remember that the cost of doing nothing is far greater. The cost of poverty, crime, and social unrest is enormous.
Yeah, and UBI can actually save money in the long run by reducing those costs.
All right. I'm starting to see the bigger picture, but I'm still not convinced it's a perfect solution.
It's not a perfect solution, but it's a step in the right direction. And it's a conversation we need to keep having.
And it's a conversation that needs to be informed by facts, evidence, and compassion.
Speaking of which, I saw another article about how state and local law enforcement are being used in immigration enforcement, like in Tennessee. Is that a good idea?
That raises profound questions about the efficacy and ethics of such strategies. Is the focus on immigration enforcement diverting resources and attention from addressing the root causes of economic disparity?
It can create a climate of fear and distrust within immigrant communities, making them less likely to cooperate with law enforcement on other matters.
So, what's the alternative? Just let everyone stay, regardless of their immigration status.
The alternative is to focus on creating a fair and just immigration system that respects the rights of all people, and to address the root causes of migration, like poverty and violence.